Okay, hello everybody. Nice to see you. Thank you guys all for making it today. We're really excited to share some information with you. We may have some other people joining along the way, but we're really happy to have you all. I'm going to start by just kind of overviewing what we're going to talk about today. My name is Michel Bayan. I'm the CEO and co-founder of DirecTech Labs. We're going to talk about a lot of the research that we've been doing, being a data science company and a behavior science company. We are very interested in the behavior of people and why they do the things that they do, especially and specifically in a direct selling context. So we're going to go over a lot of stuff today. And what you're seeing here is kind of a combination of information that we shared during a workshop that we conducted in Brussels during the European Direct Selling Association CELDIA's conference in November of last year, combined with content that we've been sharing on a kind of tour around the country during the first quarter of this year, where we've been hosting dinners for executives in direct selling and presenting this kind of information to them, doing a bit of a Q&A, and going from there. In the direct selling channel, we're kind of at an interesting inflection point. I'm sure you all are all familiar with the conversation that's going on in the space around looking at the gig economy, looking at other income opportunities, whether it be, Airbnb or Uber or, whatever else there is out there. So many different opportunities for people now that exist for them to make that little bit of extra money when only a few years ago, direct selling was one of the only games in town. Looking at how much more sophisticated e-commerce has gotten, how much more sophisticated direct-to-consumer channels that are not direct selling are getting at targeting and converting and retaining customers. All of these are competition and have been raising the bar for us and demanding more of us to be able to provide better experiences for our people. And I'm sure you've heard this conversation going on around the industry. We've been participating in it a lot and doing our best to contribute. And that's really what this is really all about here. We're going to be talking about what is it that these companies are doing exactly that is creating this kind of competitive advantage that we have that direct selling really hasn't been able to do yet. And can we do things like this? Can we do it as well? Can we do it better? And so that's really the context of what we're going to be talking about today. And this talk is called The Age of Artificial Intelligence, the Dangers and Opportunities of Influence. And we're going to start with just a simple question. And I'm going to put actually a poll out there for all of you to vote and to just ask you this one question. You'll see this poll come up on your screen. Are you the driver of your life? What does that mean? That means, are you the person with your hands on the steering wheel of your life? When you turn that steering wheel to the right, your life generally goes to the right. When you make a decision that you want to go left, you turn that steering wheel left and life goes left. So you are the conscious controller of the direction that you want your life to go in. If you think the answer to that is yes, say yes. If you think the answer to that is no, say no. And if you're like, I don't know anymore, then you can just go ahead and say, I don't know. And that's totally just fine. We're getting the votes coming in here. Going to give it another 10 seconds if you haven't voted. So far, we've got 7 of you, 88% of you. Wait, more, going up even more. So far, 89% of you are saying, yes, you are the driver of your life. No one says no, so that's good. We got a lot of people that are very confident in their ability to control. And one brave soul is saying, I just don't know. Well, what is this really? Let's end the poll and share the results with you guys so you can see how it's coming out. And let's go back to the presentation and ask ourselves this question and see what the answer is. Well, what we've discovered from our study into neurological research and behavioral science and behavior economics is that the truth really looks more kind of like this. I don't know if you've ever seen this kid at the grocery store, but there's that little kind of car in the front of the grocery store, and that kid thinks they're driving around the grocery store, and they happen to turn the wheel right, and they happen to get to cereal, and they think, wow, that was me. I did it. I got the cereal. That was me. But we really know in the back is mom pushing that shopping cart. And mom really is the driver here, isn't she? And so what we need to do is we think about this in the context of our lives. The kid in the shopping cart represents your conscious mind, the part of you that you basically identify with as yourself, the part of you that's listening right now, thinking, all that sort of calculating that goes on in the front of your mind that you're aware of, and you're calculating this or that, cost, benefit, risk, rewards, all that stuff that you know you're thinking about is your conscious mind. The interesting part about that is, while we tend to think of that as the driver of our life, really and truly, your conscious mind is only really making about 5% or less of the decisions that you make on a moment-to-moment basis. And your conscious mind really has a limited capacity. A lot of times we tend to over-identify with this part of ourselves and forget that there's this whole subconscious that's really the mom pushing the shopping cart. Now, that mom pushing the shopping cart is not someone that's not you. That's still you, but it's a part of you that goes much deeper than you're consciously aware of. Let's think about it in terms of capacity. Your conscious mind, if you could take the entire capacity of your conscious mind and fit it into 1 square foot of space, and all of the entire, calculating and computing capacity of your mind can fit in 1 square foot of space, the amount of space it would take to fill the capacity of your subconscious mind is about the whole amount of space that there is in the entire Milky Way galaxy. So that is the ratio of, if you're not paying attention to your subconscious, how much of you're really missing out on. And this is going to be a really important thing to think about. Now, I don't know about you, but the first time I heard this idea, I was reading a book by Malcolm Gladwell called Blink. And that book really my first reaction was maybe to kind of get a little bit depressed, because I was like, man, this kind of stinks, doesn't it? If I'm not the driver here, then what am I doing? Like, what's it all about? What's it all for? Well, the interesting thing about that and the redeeming quality of it, like I said, is that the mom pushing the shopping cart is still you. This subconscious version of you is actually is being programmed by your conscious, meaning that the choices that you consciously make of what type of people you're going to be around, what type of media you want to expose yourself to, what type of culture and belief system you've grown up in, and the day-to-day, moment-to-moment things that are happening in your life and how you're interpreting those and what you're making them mean are essentially creating the programs for your subconscious mind that are going to be running in the future. And so in a way, you really are the programmer of that subconscious mind by using your consciousness. And you might be asking yourself, well, where is this going? And how does this relate to direct selling? It's going to get there. And I think you're going to find this really valuable. I've been studying this stuff, really since really early in my life. My dad, one of my first memories I can remember is my dad was a pioneer in a field called psychoacoustics, which is the psychology of how sound and music can affect people's behaviors. And one of my first memories as a child was my dad owned this nightclub. And, usually you think of nightclub owners as, the kind of social people who kind of want to be the center of attention and want to be that like nightclub owner and get all that attention. The funny thing about my dad is that he wasn't really a social guy. He wasn't like really into big crowds of people, didn't really like people as that much. And really started the nightclub not to be this center of attention, but really as a laboratory. He would bring people into this club and experiment essentially on them by seeing how could he play different types of music and rearrange different playlists and different sets to see how he could affect the way that people would behave and interact with each other within the club based on the music that he was playing for them. And so that always got me really curious. One of my first jobs actually in high school was working at Tower Records. I don't know if you guys remember record stores, but one of my first jobs was there, and my dad had done a deal with them to kind of set up a special station where we could sit people down, put an eye pillow on them, put some earphones on them, and play the first track of my dad's album. And then I'd ask them like how it made them feel and observe and reflect back to them differences of how I was noticing their behavior change after they had listened to the music. So I've always been really interested in this. And when I started discovering things that companies are doing around big data, that's what got me really interested in the next level of this kind of behavior science and how big data is a really big deal. And how does that really work? Well, if you think about it, we as human beings, we're just creatures of patterns and procedures. And these patterns and procedures play their way out in our lives in many, many different ways, from the time we go to bed and our sleeping habits to the automatic way we kind of make coffee the same way every day. Or maybe even driving, you might have noticed, maybe it's Sunday morning and you get in the car and you're halfway to work before you realize, whoa, hold on a second, it's Sunday. I don't belong at work today. All these kind of things are the ways that our conscious is programming our subconscious. We're building up all these patterns and procedures, and we're essentially kind of storing up these little behavioral programs and then kind of running them at the right moment in time. And it's really important for us to be able to do this because there's so many things going on in your body, mind at the same time that there's no way that capacity of your conscious could possibly be managing it all. So a lot of it has to be pushed into the subconscious so that you've got that conscious capacity left over to do other things. Now, the interesting thing is how you've developed these patterns and procedures is in many ways unique to you. And they say a lot of things about you. And so I would imagine, and this is an interesting question to ask all of you, I'm sure many of you deal with the field directly. And maybe you've been doing so for a long time. So I'm sure there's somebody out there that's probably been dealing with the field directly for at least 10 or 20 years. And you've probably interacted with thousands of brand new reps. And, I'd imagine that over the years, you've probably developed this kind of radar for them, right? Where you can meet a new rep and maybe within 5 or 10 minutes of talking to them, you could get a pretty good gut feeling of whether that person's actually going to build this business and actually going to get to work or not, right? If you're that person, I invite you to think for a second and ask yourself, what's my hit rate on that? When I meet people and I'm trying to make that judgment call, what percentage of the time am I accurate? Maybe after 10 years of doing it or 20 years of doing it, maybe you got yourself a really good hit rate, right? Maybe you're 80% of the time, you can tell if that person's really going to do the business or not. And that's awesome, right? I mean, you've built all those years of experience and pattern recognition to be able to know that. And how do you know that? Well, think about it. There's a conscious part to it and a subconscious part of it. The conscious part is all the thoughts and calculations that are going in your mind, all that kind of internal dialogue of what you're telling yourself about this person and what question you're choosing to ask next. And that's your conscious mind. And then there's kind of like this gut feeling about it, right? This kind of bubbling up feeling of gut that you get about whether you think this person's going to work or not. And that feeling you get, that bubbling up from your gut, that's your subconscious sending you a signal. And that plays a big part, that gut feeling plays a big part in your ability to be accurate. And so how does this really work in an AI context? Well, if we're creatures of these patterns and procedures, and we can get as many of those data points that you're collecting when you meet a new person, and we can feed all those data points into a computer, and maybe even feed more data points than our conscious is able to understand, right? Your subconscious is holding a lot more details about all these interactions you've had over the years than your conscious can hold. But a computer is all conscious, right? So it can hold all that stuff, and it can do it times thousands and thousands or millions and millions of distributors all over the world. And it can try to find that same hit rate that you're doing. The difference is that it can do it times millions of people in a matter of seconds and be as accurate or more accurate than a human being can. So it allows us to basically scale that experience that you've spent all these years doing and gaining in an instant times everyone in the field at any moment in time in a matter of seconds. That's the kind of thing that machine learning does. And companies are using these patterns and procedures in a lot of different contexts. They're using this data to basically influence you, to serve you, and to sometimes manipulate you. And this is a really interesting and new field. A lot of new regulations like GDPR, for example, are coming up to try to figure out how do we wrap our heads around what's really going on with these AIs so that we can use them to provide really good quality and valuable experiences for people and avoid some of the negative stuff. And you guys know all these companies that are up here. All these companies use this information to create the experience that you have with them. Let me give you a couple of examples. We're going to get into Facebook and Netflix in a minute, but let's think about Google. Most of you have probably been a user of YouTube, and you could imagine that YouTube has this algorithm where once you've watched one video, it's going to autoplay the next one, and it's going to show on the right-hand column all of those videos that it's suggesting that you might want to watch next. Now, YouTube is making a decision of what it's going to show you, right? It's got millions and millions of possible videos that it can put in front of you. What's it going to play next automatically? What's it going to show you on the right-hand side? It's going to do that, and it's going to show you videos that it thinks you're going to want to watch so that it can keep you on YouTube longer so that they can show you more ads, right? That's the whole model of Google, and that's how they make their billions, right? And we'll get more into how that happens. They're also doing this on the government scale. So governments now, I don't know if you saw this story on 60 Minutes about a year or so ago. Many of you know that Chicago was becoming kind of the murder capital of the United States. And it was a major problem. And they didn't really know what to do about it. So they hired these AI guys, and they came up with this algorithm that, believe it or not, could predict if someone was going to murder or be murdered by another person. And if you saw that movie Minority Report, you're probably thinking about it right now. It's not quite that. While if you did get flagged, they did show up at your house, it wasn't to arrest you. It was to offer you social programs. So it was like, hey, how about we get you a driver's license? How about we get you some job training? Let's get you a job, right? Let's make sure you get taken care of by society so that you don't kill anybody. Long story short, this actually proved to be really effective. And finally that year, for the first time in a long time, the murder rate in Chicago dropped down. This is being used in a lot of different areas now, and governments are looking at this more and more and more to be able to do things like that hopefully serve a value to society. Now, when can this go wrong? Well, I'm sure you all heard the story of Cambridge Analytica. This might seem now like it was really a Facebook problem, and I think that there was a little bit of miscommunication and mischaracterization in the news of what actually happened. Here's the important part of what happened with Cambridge Analytica. It's not that there was all this data in Facebook that got poorly shared, and they went against Facebook's privacy policy and shared all this data. That was definitely bad. And Facebook needs to do a much better job at that, and they're really dedicating themselves to that from what I can tell. The interesting part about what happened was what Cambridge Analytica was able to do with that data about these millions and millions of people. By taking all of that information about how they interacted on Facebook and about these personality profiles that they had filled out, they were able to create these really complicated psychological profiles about over 100 million Americans. And based on that psychological profile, they could tell if somebody had a higher propensity to vote for Trump or had a higher propensity to vote for Hillary, or if they were undecided, which way might they lean. And they were also able to understand what's the hot button issue for this person versus that person versus this person. And they came up with a huge menu of a bunch of hot button issues. And then they created very, very specific ads designed to push that button on the right person. So if you were, a gun advocate in Texas that was 50 years old and white, you might get a video on Trump talking about how we got to protect our gun rights. If you are a sort of older, retired, Black person in the inner city of Baltimore, and you're an undecided voter, they might send you a video of the one time Hillary said Black people are dangerous, right? And so they were doing this times over 100 million people pushing their little specific buttons to try to influence their behavior, either to make them doubt voting for Hillary or more likely to vote for Trump. And they were spending a lot of money on this. And many people credit this effort as a big reason why Trump was able to kind of come out and win the election. Now, we don't have to get into the ethics of all this, because that could be a whole other conversation one day. But the fact is that this is a doable thing now. And how do companies do this for good? Well, most of you, I'm sure, are Netflix users. And when you log into Netflix, you're going to see some menu that looks like this. That's a whole bunch of suggested content that Netflix is going to serve up to you. Now, if you have a spouse or a child and you log into their Netflix account, you might see a completely different menu here of content that you never even knew existed on Netflix. How do they do that? Well, Netflix also is taking all this data about you and people like you, about how you interact with content, using that to build a behavior and psychological profile about you, and then using that profile to guess what type of content it can put in front of you that you're more likely to watch. Because at the end of the day, Netflix is a subscription, or it's kind of like an auto ship, right? And just like any subscription product, if you don't consume the product, you're not going to keep that subscription. And so Netflix invests millions and millions of dollars into this algorithm. They even have contests where they'll pay someone $1 million if they can make it 1% more accurate, because they know that there's billions of dollars of retention built into this Netflix algorithm. If you had to just sort through it like you used to on your old cable when you had 4 million channels on cable and you had to find it yourself, how much more painful was that than Netflix? And so think about that. All of the big companies these days that are competing with us, gig economy companies, e-commerce companies, direct-to-consumer products, all of these companies are leveraging AI to absorb a bunch of data about how their users and customers are interacting with their system, to take that data, turn it into a behavioral profile about you, and then try to lever that profile into putting content in front of you that gets you to do behavior, which results in you spending money. That's the way that Facebook can charge as much for the ads that they do, because when you see an ad, you're much more likely to buy that thing from Facebook than you are somewhere else, because Facebook is that good at targeting you with the right ad at the right moment, so that you're more likely to buy than anyone else, and therefore they can charge more for that ad. Now, all of these companies in the world are using this in the context of, how do I do this to get people to spend more money? How does this relate to direct selling? Well, in the direct selling context, we know that in order to get people to spend money, we only have one thing to do, which is we have to get people to do things that cause them to make money, right? When our distributors make money, our customers buy more and our companies make more money. So our job really is to support our sellers in making more money in a more reliable way. Not necessarily to make a lot, but to make whatever's right for them consistently. And we think of that concept as, how do we create that type of experience for people? It really is about retention. It's really about the longer you can keep someone around, and if they're a distributor, that is by helping them make money, the longer the more their lifetime value is going to be, and the fewer number of people you need to recruit to make the same amount of money. And those people continue to recruit for longer, so it also equals a lot of growth. As a matter of fact, if you do the math, you'll find that a little bit of an increase in retention can equal more growth than just about any other initiative you have on the table. But how much is that? Well, we did the math in an example, and we wanted to show you guys, like, what is it really worth? Well, if you think about it this way, if you're a company, you've got 30,000 distributors and 100,000 customers ordering every month, 25,000 of those people are new, and you've got an average churn rate. So industry average, about 18 to 20% of all these people are buying or selling for the last time that month. You got about 23,400 people that are acting for the last time on a given month. If the average order size or average purchase of a person per month is $125, you're looking at about a $200 million company here. Now, what would happen to this $200 million company if they could make their retention a little bit better? Meaning, if they could take that 18% number in line 4, and just instead of losing 18% of everybody every month, they could lose 17% of everybody every month. What would that equal to them over the course of a year? Well, have a look here. At the end of the year, this company would make $18 million more and see about a 9% lift. If they're paying out 45% in commissions, their existing field today, not much of a bigger group than what they have today, would make $8 million more. So what does that do to your revenue per distributor when you're paying $8 million more out to about the same group of people? And assuming they have an operating margin of 10%, they'd see about $1.8 million in profit. And all that for just saving 1,300 of the 23,000 people every month. So just a small fraction of the people that are leaving, you get them to stay for another month or 2 or 10. And you can go deeper into this and calculate attrition rates over time and look at how long the cohorts stay around and all that kind of stuff and dig deeper into it. But from a high level number, it's like this. And the difference is same company, you look at 2%. What's the difference for them? Same size company, 2%. Now they're doing an 18% lift. Where else in a business in direct selling can you make a small, tiny little impact on a fraction of your people and see that kind of lift? Now, okay, great idea. Really cool math, Michel. Wonderful. Your math looks really cool. But how do you really do that, right? And how do we take the concepts of what all of our competitors in other industries are doing and apply that to us? Well, it's going to take a technology investment, right? One way or the other. And when you're looking at technology investments, it's really great to think of them on this kind of a grid. You want to look at the things that are going to be the highest business impact with the lowest amount of technical difficulty. The challenge with this kind of technology is that it's still pretty new. The people that know how to do it are really expensive. Trying to build out a team is going to cost you a lot of money. You might end up in the kind of upper right quadrant here if you're not careful. And that's where maybe thinking about partnering could be an interesting thing. And all this, the idea of what we're doing here is all about taking us toward one point and one concept, the concept of personalization. That's really what Netflix is doing to you. That's what Facebook is doing, Amazon is doing. They're all creating an experience for you that is far more personalized. And so every individual user is getting a different experience. You're not all seeing the same thing. And so what we asked ourselves when we started doing our research is we asked ourselves, well, if we want to help direct selling move more into the area of personalization, we have to go and understand the behavior of distributors and customers at a much deeper level. We had this database of 15 million direct sellers and their customers in 85 countries around the world, and all of the behavior they did over almost 7 years. And we wanted to ask ourselves the question, well, there's 15 million people here that have gone through a life cycle, but there can't be 15 million different ways a life cycle can go. How many kind of statistically relevant groups are there? We don't want to do it from a marketing perspective where we're going to decide what the groups are and then fit people into those groups. We want to do a behavioral analysis and ask ourselves, how many actual pathways through a life cycle in direct selling are there? And what we found after this analysis was that there's really only 9 different groups. Only 9 ways a life cycle can go, from someone who comes in and buys once and you never see them again, all the way up to your top income earner. There's really only 9 kind of specifically unique behavioral groups. And how do those break up? So what we've done is we've created like a little report that I'll show you here. That'll show you on the top left here the names that we've named each of the groups. So you'll see that there's 5 distributor groups from top leader down to new joining builders, and 4 customer groups. And then we created a 10th group called inactive people. And this is an example of a sample direct selling company, nobody in particular, looking at a cohort in a specific month, let's say January of 2018, and how their field and customers broke up into all these different groups. And then that same group of people, how they all shifted in February, March, and April, and so on. And what we found is that these groups are dynamic. Once someone is in one, they don't necessarily stay there forever. Most of them do, but then some of them move on higher. Then most of them stay, and some of them move on higher. And so you want to be able to track this dynamically if you want to be able to affect personalization. From an industry-wide perspective, we noticed a couple of trends. So if you come down here to the behavioral segments section, you'll see a little bit of information we found that you might find interesting. We found that this group called Top Leader, this is basically the only group of people who make anywhere near a full-time revenue. These people represent less than 1% of your field. And this is really interesting from a behavioral science perspective, because when we show this to customers, a lot of times they're surprised, because there's a thing called, in behavioral science, called confirmation bias, which means that the things that you tend to see a lot are the things that you think will exist more than they actually exist. And because people on corporate tend to speak and spend most of their time communicating with the field, communicating with top leaders, they end up with a subconscious bias that there's way more top leaders or people that will become top leaders than there actually are. And that can really negatively affect your decision-making. And so by being able to see the data of how things actually spread out here, you'll be able to really understand what's going on. So you've got these top leader groups and looking at how much money they tend to earn over a year, how many people they tend to recruit over their life cycle, what the highest level of rank they might achieve in their, most of them will achieve in their life cycle, and how long their life cycle generally tends to be. What you'll notice is that when you move down to the next statistically relevant group, you see pretty much a 10x drop in 12-month payout. So the next group down from top leaders makes 10 times less than the top leaders. And they represent about 3%. Now, with your numbers in your field, it might be 4, it might be 2, but it's going to be somewhere in this area. They also tend to recruit about 10 times less. About half as many. So that's kind of interesting that people that will recruit half as many in their lifetime will make 10 times less in a year. It's an interesting thing to look at. They'll also spend almost as much, a little bit less, maybe 25% less. The next group down is business builders. Now, these people tend to make a lot less too. It's another big drop. About 7% of the people last a little bit shorter, maybe 2/3 of the time of a top leader. And then all of a sudden the recruiting takes a big drop. And so this third most productive group of yours will only recruit 3. And maybe again, for your company, it might be 7 or 1 or something like that, but it's not going to be 25. Next, and the most important group that I think is interesting that we forget about is the casual builder. And these are people that really seem to be more kind of opportunistic sellers, people who aren't actively selling, or they're only selling at the moment that they want to make a little bit of extra cash. Now, there's an interesting thing about this group that you might find in your company, which is that generally speaking, 50 to 60% of the new sales that are generated on a monthly basis actually come from these people. People who almost none of them will move to a higher class, and maybe some of them will become business builders. And so if you think about this, it's actually really important to think about how you communicate with your field and the type of messages you're giving people by what you're saying and by what you're not saying. So if a casual builder is generating 50 to 60% of your sales and the messages that they're getting from the company are all about ranking up and trying to win cruises and trying to do big things like that, and we're talking about, replacing our full-time income and making a whole bunch of money and all that kind of stuff, what you're really telling these people subconsciously is, you're not good enough for us and you don't belong here. But these people generate 50 to 60% of your sales every month. So if you could somehow know who these people are on a day-to-day basis, pull them out aside from everyone else and put them on a little bit of a different training program, a little bit of a different form of recognition, a little bit of a different promotion strategy, and definitely a different email strategy. Could you not help these people maybe have a more quality experience for who they are? And instead of maybe pushing someone who's only going to bring 1 or 2 people in their whole life cycle to try to do 10, we try to just make it 3 or 4. That would double the production of the people that generate 50 to 60% of your sales. Wouldn't that be awesome? And wouldn't that be a great start? Wouldn't that mean a lot of additional revenue for you? And so by being able to understand who's in which group, you can create a much more personalized paths by group and have different training at your convention for different people, different email and so on, like we've been describing. And so what we're looking for from you, and if you want to type in some questions, you're welcome to do that, is ask some questions And we also want to know what's interesting to you here and what other information about these behavior groups would be interesting for you to have. We're continuing to do our research. We want to continue to use it to both develop our product and to share more of our findings with you guys. And so if you've got some ideas of what else you'd like to know, of how it could be better, go ahead and type those in the Q&A, and we'll start answering those questions toward the end of this in a few more minutes. There's one more thing I want to share with you. There's another layer here. This is what we call personalization. There's another layer that's available to you, and this is really what these Netflix and all these other companies are doing, is they're getting into the next level of things, which we call hyper-personalization. Personalization is breaking people up into these groups and treating them according to the group that they are in, right? So instead of trying to treat everyone the same, one communication plan for all, we've now got maybe 5 or 6 or 7 different communications plans for different people in different groups. Hyper-personalization is going all the way down to the level of the individual, meaning the lady here in the middle with the hat might need a completely different experience than the lady sitting next to her or the guy sitting next to her. And understanding all the way down to the personalized level, what does this lady need to have happen for her right now in order for her to have the best quality of experience that she can have, that's the right one for her at this particular moment in time. And this is where hyper-personalization comes into play. And the way that we do that, and then if you want to see a demo of how we do that, you can text demo to the number on your screen, is you want to try to keep people around longer, right? Retention is what it's all about. And so it's all about understanding who is coming toward the potential end of their life cycle, but that it's still far away, so that they're very active today. Maybe they just recruited someone today, or maybe they just sold something yesterday, right? But they are still active, very, very active. How can we know that this person maybe just sold the last thing they're ever going to sell? Well, that's what these behavior profiles can do for you. That's what Netflix is doing. That's what your cable company is doing. You might get all of a sudden a special offer from an airline or a cable company. That's because they are sensing that you might be on a downward curve, and they want to reinvigorate your energy to interface with that brand. That's what these alerts are designed to do. So you might get a distributor in the field who might have just dropped her kids off at school, and she might get an alert on her text message that looks like this. Hey, Jane, Margot needs your attention. Margot's someone on her team. Help her rank up. So this is the specific thing that Margot needs to get in order to reinvigorate Margot's life cycle and have it continue to go on longer instead of ending in the next 30 days or so. So now we know exactly what she has to get from Margot. It might, for someone else, it could be have a great product experience. For someone else, it could be make $200. If you can know exactly what a single person needs, you can provide that experience, tell them what the value is, and then let them do a little bit of interaction so they can say, well, what else can you tell me about this person? I'm on the go right now. Well, we can get them a snapshot of that person's numbers so they can get a little bit more context before they make the call, since they might be on the go. They might not have their back office in front of them. Great, give them a couple snapshot numbers. And they might also ask, well, why are you sending this to me? I'm actually not Margot's sponsor. And it might say, well, I've actually tried alerting their sponsor, but they didn't do anything. So now I'm escalating that up to you. And so there's a lot of ways that this can go. You can track that they made the phone call. Once you know they made that call, you can do sentiment analysis. You can follow up with other questions that get you better knowing what they're all about. I don't want to get too deep into this, but this is an example of hyper-personalization in a direct selling context. If you want to know more, we're really happy to share that with you. And we've also got this ROI calculator for you. So that math that we were showing you on the screen in terms of the value of retention is something that we can offer you in an Excel spreadsheet, show you how to use it, and allow you to create business cases for yourself in just a matter of seconds in terms of what the value of increasing retention in your company and extending life cycles in your company is actually worth. So you can reach out to Danielle at DirecTechLabs.com, tell her you're interested in that, and we'll make sure that you get it and we show you how to use it. And so for now, we're going to move into some Q&A. You can ask questions in 2 different ways. Best way to do it is to type it into the chat and start doing that. And I'm going to start looking and seeing what kind of questions we have. Oh, great question. So someone asked the question, are the customers in this behavioral group, I'll go back to here, are the customers in this behavioral group actually people who have signed a distributor contract, or are they outside the distributor network? In other words, are they registered or preferred customers? That's a really, really great question. So what you want to do if you're going to create a behavior profile is you want to look at people that are, you want to look at them based on how they are actually behaving, not what they said they were going to do. So for example, somebody might sign up to be a distributor and the database might say this person is distributor, but they never sell anything to anyone and they really just act like a customer. If that's what they're doing, then you want to treat them by what they do rather than what they say, right? Actions speak louder than words. So treating someone as a customer, even though they might be categorized as a distributor, gives you a much more likelihood that you're going to provide them an experience that's valuable to them. And that's the important distinction here. We don't want to be thinking about how do I get everybody to do what I want them to do or what I wish they would all do, and have a little bit of faith in the idea that if we can create an experience for people that's actually valuable to them, for who they are, not who we wish they would be, we can get a lot more lifetime value out of a lot of people, and we can avoid a lot of that negative brand impact that setting really high expectations for people that most people don't meet is going to have on your brand when those people end up leaving and not having good things to say about you. So that's a great question. Really, really good thing to think about. Let's see. So the question is can you do this with customers and with distributors? And the answer is yes. If I click a little bit, oh, it's not, I'm sorry. Yes, it's true. There are other groups here called customers, high performers, poor performers, and so on. And you can analyze the behavior of those people and either work with them directly via your call center or via email, or trigger alerts to their uplines or the people who sign them up as customers to give them that experience. The next question here, let's see, is at what point do you actually promote a convention or event to your distributors? At what point is it best to do this? That is an interesting question. Well, I don't really know, and I don't want to tell you that I know the answer to that. I would say that you would want to set up some experiments to see what works. And if you're operating from a fundamental principle of trying to help people really get a good experience, you want to think about, well, what is the cost that this person is going to incur by going to my convention? And what's the probability that they're going to be able to recoup that cost after convention? So maybe you've got some data on, people that go to convention, what behavior group they're in, and what percentage of people from what behavior group then either remain active or increase their amount of activity afterward. So you can find the subset of people who really are going to get value out of your convention, and it really is going to push their business, and you can get them there and get the people who weren't going to get that value not there. And maybe focus on webinars for those people, because someone who's only going to make $129 every year is definitely not going to make it to is definitely not going to get value out of coming all the way out to your convention. But maybe a webinar that is more tuned for a more casual and kind of opportunistic way to do the business, where you've got a small number of customers, but because you can take really good care of them. Maybe that's a different way to treat people than getting that specific group to a convention. I don't know. It would take a lot of different ways to think about it. Let's see what the next question is. Yeah, so some people are saying, can you slice and dice this in a way where you're looking at the behaviors of people who have signed a distributor agreement versus people who have not? And the answer is yes, of course you can, definitely. There's definitely ways to slice and dice it that way. And you're right, looking at people who have signed a distributor agreement and basically have, or at least to the best of your knowledge, have said, I opt to do this business, especially if there's a customer option and they've opted out of that, you could probably stand to maybe push those people a little bit more within a certain period of time. I would imagine that if someone who signed up as a distributor hasn't really become active within a certain period of time, which is generally the way that we look at it, say, first 90 days or so, the chances of them becoming active are extremely low. And if you push them to do the business, you might push them out and lose them as a customer. So what you want to do is you want to find that happy medium where how can you push someone who signed up as a distributor who hasn't really been active? How can you push them far enough, but not too far, and know when the right time is to engage that save as a customer so that if they're not going to do the business, you don't intimidate them out or annoy them out with too much business messaging if they've decided the business isn't right for them. And that's another thing you can do is you can ask. One of the things we find that most companies don't do is ask. They don't ask questions of their distributors about what they really want at any given moment in time, about the quality of experience that they're having. If you look at all the great brands that you interact with, they're always asking you, how are we doing? What can we do better for you? What's working for you and not? And all that kind of stuff. And very few direct selling companies actually listen to the feedback of people that are not leaders. And as you can see, the leaders are very valuable, but they're, in terms of behavior, they are far outliers from the average. And so anything that they do and whatever motivates them is going to be very different than what motivates an average person. So be careful not to just listen to them. You want to make sure you're getting feedback from everybody. So the question is can you automatically weed out the upline of inactive people? And the answer is yeah, absolutely. So one of the things you want to be able to learn from doing hyper-personalization is being able to get the analytics of who's working and who isn't, especially at the leader level, right? All of you probably have some leaders that are really kind of kicking butt and driving that business, and some people who, maybe they're just cashing checks. And so being able to know the difference of who's who is a huge deal. When you go down to the hyper-personalization level, you get a lot more data about the specific engagement of specific people and their success rate in affecting the behavior of others. And all of that can help you much better understand the actual value that people are bringing you, and being able to pay attention to people that are doing it and maybe treat people who aren't differently. And so yes, being able to weed that out is really important. And because, one of the beauties of a multi-level compensation plan is we've got a lot of redundancy kind of built into the system. So if you want one person to call their downline and they don't do it, you can move up to the next person and try to get them to do it. And so you want to take advantage of that redundancy and be able to do that. Let's see. Is there a specific software that you recommend to identify these people within your organization to provide the specific personalization that you mentioned for small companies or even larger companies? So, yes, obviously we would recommend ourselves. We may or may not be right for you, but we're very happy to have that conversation. Generally speaking, there is sort of a not awesome news if you're a smaller company, which is once you get down to a certain size, if you haven't been around for several years and you haven't had a lot of people kind of come in and out of your business and customer cycles, you might not have enough data to actually be able to build these profiles accurately. That's something that would kind of depend on your business and your time in business. And also doing this kind of stuff is expensive. So the ROI that you get if you're a really small company, you may not be ready for it at this level. You might want to go for personalization for a while. And then when you get big enough, then you can focus on hyper-personalization. Personalization alone will do a lot of great stuff for you. So we're in the last couple minutes here. I'm wondering if anyone's got any other questions. Someone asked if the slide deck would be available after the webinar. We're going to be recording this and making this recording available. So yes, the recording of this webinar will be available. So we'll just reiterate at the end here. Remember, getting that ROI calculator, I think, will be a really great value to you. There's no obligation. We do it for free. We really want to just kind of get people thinking this way, one way or the other. And so please reach out to us, Daniela and I, if you're interested in this ROI calculator. and very happy to get that to you and show you how to use it. 15, 20 minutes, and then you can run, an unlimited amount of business cases in a matter of minutes. And so reach out to us for that. And we're gonna wrap this thing up and say thank you very much to all of you for your time. We really appreciate you. If you're going to be at the DSA event in June in Austin, we'll be there. And go ahead and reach out to us, and we'll look forward to being in touch with you soon. Thanks, everybody.